The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed with cruel finality as Abigail Nelson stared at the heavy oak door of her childhood home, tears streaming down her face. It was June 1875, and at 20 years old, she had never imagined her life would come to this moment disowned, disinherited, and cast out into the unforgiving Montana territory with nothing but a small carpetbag and the clothes on her back. "You've made your choice," her father's voice had rung out coldly from behind the door. "No daughter of mine will disgrace our family name by refusing a perfectly respectable marriage proposal." Abigail's crime had been simple. She had declined the hand of Judge Harmon, a man 40 years her senior with a reputation for cruelty toward his previous wives. Her refusal had been the final act of defiance in a long battle with her controlling parents, who viewed their only daughter as nothing more than a bargaining chip in their social climbing ambitions. Now, as twilight descended over the small but prosperous town of Silverdale, Abigail felt the weight of her uncertain future pressing down upon her shoulders. The mountain air carried a chill despite the summer season, and dark clouds gathering on the horizon promised rain before nightfall. She had to find shelter, but with only a few dollars sewn into the hem of her dress, her options were limited. Abigail squared her shoulders and turned away from the house. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. With as much dignity as she could muster, she began walking toward the center of town, her mind racing through what few possibilities remained to her. The streets were beginning to empty as storekeepers closed up for the night. A few men lingered outside the saloon, their curious glances making her quicken her pace. Unmarried women did not wander Silverdale's streets alone after dark, especially those from good families like the Nelsons. "Miss Nelson," a concerned voice called out. Abigail turned to see Mrs. Palmer, the milliner, locking up her shop. The older woman had always been kind to her, often praising Abigail's eye for design when she came in to purchase ribbons. "My dear, what are you doing out at this hour and with luggage?" Mrs. Palmer's eyes traveled from Abigail's face to her carpetbag and back again, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding. "Oh, it's happened then." News traveled quickly in small towns, and her parents' ultimatum regarding Judge Harmon had evidently not remained private. "Yes, madam," Abigail replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "They've made their position quite clear." Mrs. Palmer clicked her tongue disapprovingly. "That judge is no fit husband for a young woman like yourself. Your father's ambitions have clouded his judgment." She hesitated. "I would offer you a place to stay, but my husband—" Abigail understood. Mr. Palmer was deeply indebted to her father's bank. Offering shelter to the disowned daughter would have consequences. "I understand," Abigail assured her. "I'll find somewhere." "The stage coach to Helena leaves tomorrow morning," Mrs. Palmer said. "If you can make it until then, perhaps a fresh start somewhere new would be best." She pressed a few coins into Abigail's hand. "It isn't much, but it will help." Before Abigail could thank her properly, a crack of thunder split the air, and the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Mrs. Palmer hurried away with one last sympathetic glance, leaving Abigail alone as the skies opened up. Within minutes, she was soaked through, her blue cotton dress clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The carpetbag, which contained what few personal possessions she had managed to grab a photograph of her late grandmother, a cherished book of poetry, a spare dress, and undergarments, was becoming waterlogged as well. Desperate for shelter, Abigail hurried toward the only place she could think of that might still be open, the livery stable at the edge of town. At least there she could wait out the worst of the storm. The rain was coming down in sheets by the time she reached the large wooden building. Light still glowed from within, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Abigail hesitated only briefly before pushing open the side door and slipping inside. The warm, earthy smell of hay and horses enveloped her as she stepped into the relative dryness of the stable. She stood just inside the doorway, water pooling at her feet, uncertain of her welcome. "Hello," she called softly, not wanting to startle anyone who might be working late. From the back of the stable, a tall figure emerged from one of the stalls. Even in the dim lantern light, Abigail could make out broad shoulders, a strong jawline, and eyes that seemed to take in her bedraggled state in an instant. "Miss, you're soaked through," the man said, his voice deep and tinged with concern. He grabbed a horse blanket from a nearby hook and approached her. "Here, take this before you catch your death." Gratefully, Abigail accepted the rough blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, her teeth beginning to chatter. "I just needed somewhere to escape the storm." The man studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable in the shadowy light. "You're the Nelson girl, aren't you?" Abigail stiffened. "I was," she replied, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "News travels fast in Silverdale." He extended a hand. "Thomas Sullivan. Most folks just call me Tucker." Abigail had seen him around town before, the young cowboy who had taken over the livery after old Mr. Peterson had passed away the previous winter. He couldn't be much older than 25, with weathered skin that spoke of long days under the sun and calloused hands that testified to hard work. "Abigail Nelson," she replied, taking his hand briefly. "Though I suppose it's just Abigail now." Tucker nodded, not pressing for details. Instead, he gestured toward the back of the stable. "There's a small office with a stove. You can warm up there while the storm passes." He led her past the stalls where horses nickered softly, to a modest room furnished with a desk, 2 chairs, and a pot-bellied stove that radiated blessed heat. A coffee pot sat atop it, and the rich aroma made Abigail realize how hungry she was. "It isn't much," Tucker said, stoking the fire, "but it's dry." "It's perfect," Abigail assured him, moving closer to the stove's warmth. "Thank you." Tucker poured a cup of coffee and handed it to her. "Drink this. It'll warm you from the inside." Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Abigail felt a strange flutter in her chest. She attributed it to her exhaustion and the day's emotional turmoil. "So," Tucker said, settling into the chair across from her, "what's your plan?" The directness of his question caught Abigail off guard. Most people in town would have danced around the subject, offering platitudes instead of practical conversation. "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted, sipping the strong black coffee. "Mrs. Palmer mentioned the stagecoach to Helena tomorrow. I thought perhaps I could find work there." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "As what? No offense meant, but what skills do you have that would earn you a living?" It was a fair question, if bluntly put. Abigail had been raised to run a household and to be an ornament in society. Her education had focused on literature, music, and social graces, not on anything that would help her survive independently. "I can read and write well," she offered. "I'm good with figures. Perhaps I could find work as a shop assistant or—" She faltered, the reality of her situation hitting her anew. Tucker didn't sugarcoat it. "Helena's full of desperate people looking for work, young women on their own." He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. The dangers were real. "What would you suggest?" Abigail asked, surprising herself with the question. Why should she value this man's opinion? And yet, there was something about his straightforward manner that commanded respect. Tucker considered for a moment. "My sister runs a small ranch about a day's ride west of here. She's been looking for help since her husband died last winter. It's not fancy living, but it's honest work, and you'd have a roof over your head." Abigail blinked, taken aback by the unexpected offer. "Your sister would take in a complete stranger." Tucker's mouth quirked up at one corner. "Catherine's a good judge of character, and she trusts my judgment. Besides, she's got 2 young children to care for while trying to keep the ranch going. She needs the help more than she needs to worry about your pedigree." The rain continued to drum against the roof as Abigail considered his words. The prospect of a ranch in the middle of nowhere was daunting, but so was the idea of arriving in Helena with almost no money and no concrete prospects. "Why would you help me?" she asked finally. "You barely know me." Tucker's gaze was steady. "I know enough. I know Judge Harmon is a mean old cuss who's buried 2 wives already. I know your father cares more about his standing with the railroad men than his own daughter's happiness. And I know that anyone willing to stand up against that kind of pressure has backbone, which is something my sister would appreciate." Abigail couldn't help but smile slightly at his assessment. "You make it sound like I made a brave choice." "The truth is, I was simply too terrified of the alternative to do anything else." "Sometimes that's what bravery looks like," Tucker replied simply. "Making the hard choice because the easy one is unbearable." They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional whinny from the horses. Abigail found herself studying Tucker surreptitiously. He wasn't handsome in the conventional way of the young men her parents had approved of, but there was a strength in his features that she found compelling. His dark hair curled slightly where it met his collar, and his eyes, which she could now see were a warm hazel, had a directness that made her feel simultaneously exposed and secure. "The rain's letting up," Tucker observed after a while, rising to peer out the small window. "But it's full dark now. Not safe for you to be out looking for lodging." Abigail tensed, uncertain what he was suggesting. As if sensing her discomfort, Tucker quickly added, "I have a cot in the back room. You can sleep there tonight, and I'll head to my quarters above the smithy. In the morning, we can decide about Catherine's offer." Relief washed over her. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Sullivan." "Tucker," he corrected. "If we're going to be traveling companions tomorrow, we might as well use first names." "Tucker," Abigail repeated, finding she liked the way it felt on her tongue. "And yes, I think I would like to meet your sister if the offer is genuine." For the first time, a full smile transformed Tucker's serious face, creating crinkles at the corners of his eyes. "Good. Catherine will be pleased." He paused. "And Abigail, the door to this stable doesn't lock, but it'll always be open to you. That's a promise." In that moment, with rain pattering gently on the roof and the warm glow of the stove casting long shadows across the room, Abigail felt the first stirrings of hope since the devastating click of her family's lock. Perhaps there was a path forward after all. True to his word, Tucker showed her to a small back room where a narrow cot was pushed against one wall. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but the bedding was clean, and after the emotional exhaustion of the day, Abigail was grateful for any place to rest. "I'll be back at dawn," Tucker told her, placing a lantern on a small table beside the cot. "Try to get some sleep." After he left, Abigail changed into her spare dress, hanging her damp clothes on a nail protruding from the wall. She lay down, expecting sleep to claim her immediately, but instead found herself wide awake, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. What would life be like on a ranch? Could she adapt to such a different existence? And what of Tucker Sullivan, this man who had so unexpectedly offered her a lifeline? There was something about him that intrigued her, a steadiness that felt reassuring after the chaos of the day. Eventually, lulled by the distant sounds of the horses and the lingering warmth of the stove, Abigail drifted into a deep sleep. She woke to the gentle touch of sunlight on her face. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, expecting to see the familiar surroundings of her bedroom. Reality crashed back as she took in the rough wooden walls and the narrow cot beneath her. A soft knock at the door preceded Tucker's voice. "Abigail, are you awake?" "I've brought some breakfast." Quickly smoothing her hair and straightening her dress, Abigail called, "Yes, come in." Tucker entered, bearing a tray with 2 steaming cups and a plate of biscuits. "It's not much," he apologized, "but it'll keep us going until midday." "It looks wonderful," Abigail assured him, suddenly ravenous. She hadn't eaten since a light lunch the previous day. They sat together on 2 upturned crates, sharing the simple meal in companionable silence. Abigail found herself studying Tucker in the morning light. His features were sharper than she'd realized, his jaw strong and determined, his hands capable as they broke a biscuit in half. "I've saddled 2 horses for our journey," Tucker said as they finished eating. "Do you ride?" Abigail nodded. "Yes, though it's been some time. My father." She trailed off, not wanting to dwell on painful memories. Tucker seemed to understand. "The mare I've picked for you is gentle. We'll take it slow." As they prepared to leave, Abigail realized she had no appropriate clothes for riding. Her dresses would be impractical for a day on horseback, especially with the mud from last night's rain. Seeing her dilemma, Tucker disappeared and returned with a bundle of fabric. "These are my sisters," he explained, handing over a pair of men's trousers and a simple shirt. "She left them here last time she visited. They might be a bit large, but they'll serve better than what you're wearing." Abigail hesitated, eyeing the masculine attire. Ladies in Silverdale did not wear trousers, not even for riding. But then again, she was no longer bound by Silverdale's expectations or her parents' rules. "Thank you," she said, taking the clothes. "I'll change quickly." When she emerged from the back room, Abigail felt strangely liberated in her borrowed outfit. The trousers were indeed loose, secured with a length of rope as a belt, but the freedom of movement they allowed was revelatory. Tucker's eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, but he made no comment beyond a nod of approval. "Ready to go." Outside, 2 horses waited patiently, a sturdy brown gelding and a dappled gray mare. Tucker helped Abigail mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, and she quickly focused on adjusting herself in the saddle to hide her confusion. "We'll head west, following the creek," Tucker explained, swinging easily onto his own horse. "It's about 30 miles to Catherine's place. We should make it by nightfall if we keep a decent pace." With one last look at the town that had been her home her entire life, Abigail turned her horse and followed Tucker out of Silverdale. She didn't look back at her parents' house on the hill. That chapter of her life was closed. The day was clear and bright after the storm, the mountains in the distance crowned with fresh snow despite the summer season. As they rode, Tucker pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area, gradually drawing Abigail out of her shell. "How long have you been running the livery?" she asked as they paused to let the horses drink from the creek. "About 8 months, Tucker replied, stretching his long legs. "Before that, I worked as a hand on various ranches, did some scouting for the Army," he shrugged. "I've done a bit of everything since coming west." "You're not from Montana originally?" Abigail was curious about this man who seemed so at home in the rugged landscape. "Born in Pennsylvania. My father was a blacksmith. When he died, there wasn't much keeping us there. Catherine had already married and moved west with her husband, so Ma and I followed." A shadow crossed his face. "Ma didn't last long out here. The winters were too harsh for her constitution." "I'm sorry," Abigail said softly, Tucker nodded in acknowledgement. What about you? Has your family always been in Silverdale? Abigail told him about her father's banking business, how he had moved them from Boston when she was just a child, determined to make his fortune in the expanding territories. She spoke of her mother's constant striving for social acceptance, and how Abigail's refusal to marry Judge Harmon had been seen as the ultimate betrayal of their ambitions. They wanted to secure connections with the territorial judge, she explained. Father has his eyes on political appointments and Judge Harmon has influence with the governor. And what did you want? Tucker asked, his gaze direct. The question caught Abigail off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I suppose I wanted a choice, she said slowly. I wanted to marry someone I could respect, perhaps even love. Is that too much to ask? Not too much at all, Tucker replied. Though it's rarer than it should be out here, most marriages are still arrangements of convenience or necessity. They remounted and continued their journey, the terrain gradually changing from open meadows to more forested areas. By midday, they stopped in a small clearing to rest and eat the jerky and hardtack Tucker had packed. Tell me about your sister, Abigail requested as they sat on a fallen log. What should I expect? Tucker smiled fondly. Catherine's 3 years older than me, tough as rawhide but with a heart just as big. Her husband James died of pneumonia last winter, leaving her with the ranch and 2 children, Emma, who's 7, and Michael, who's 5. And the ranch itself? Nothing grand, about 200 acres, mostly for cattle. There's a decent-sized cabin, a barn, a chicken coop. He glanced at her. It's a far cry from what you're used to, I expect. Abigail straightened her shoulders. I'm prepared to work hard, Tucker. I may not have experience, but I'm willing to learn. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. I believe you are. Catherine will teach you what you need to know. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the sun warm on their backs. Abigail found herself growing more comfortable in the saddle, and conversation with Tucker flowed easily. He had a quiet wisdom about him, never wasting words but speaking thoughtfully when he did. As the day wore on, Abigail became aware of a growing tension in her companion. His eyes scanned the surrounding forests more frequently, and his hand occasionally strayed to the rifle secured to his saddle. Is something wrong? She finally asked. Tucker's mouth tightened. Probably nothing. Just keeping alert. These woods can harbor all sorts of dangers. Abigail was about to press for more information when a sharp crack echoed through the trees. Before she could react, Tucker was beside her, pulling her from her horse and down behind a large boulder. Stay down, he ordered, his voice low and urgent. He drew his revolver, eyes scanning the trees. What is it? Abigail whispered, heart pounding. Rifle shot. Could be a hunter, but I don't take chances. Tucker whistled softly, and remarkably, both horses trotted over to their position, providing additional cover. Another shot rang out, this one splintering bark from a tree near where they had been riding. Definitely not a hunter, Tucker muttered. He raised his voice. We're just passing through. We don't want trouble. Silence stretched for several tense moments before a voice called back from the trees. Sullivan, that you? Tucker frowned, then recognition dawned. Miller, Frank Miller, a figure emerged from the forest, a gaunt man with a wild beard and desperate eyes, clutching a rifle. Didn't recognize you at first with the lady, the man said, lowering his weapon slightly. Tucker stood slowly, keeping Abigail behind him. What are you doing out here, Frank? Last I heard you were working the Thompson claim. Frank's laugh was bitter. Thompson claim played out, then the bank took my stake, said I was behind on payments. His bloodshot eyes fixed on Abigail. You with the bank, miss? Abigail felt a chill run down her spine. No, she answered truthfully. I'm not. Tucker kept his voice level. "Frank, we're just passing through to my sister's ranch. We're not looking for trouble." The man seemed to deflate, his aggression fading into weariness. "Don't have no quarrel with you, Sullivan, just jumpy these days." He gestured vaguely behind him. "Got a camp back yonder, wife's sick, no medicine, no food neither, 'cept what I can hunt." Tucker holstered his revolver but remained vigilant. "I've got some jerky and hardtack we can spare. Maybe some coffee too." Frank's eyes brightened with pathetic hope. "That'd be mighty kind." As Tucker cautiously retrieved supplies from his saddlebag, Abigail was struck by the desperation of the man before them. This was the harsh reality of frontier life. One bad turn of luck could leave a person destitute, especially when banks like her father's showed no mercy. "Your wife needs a doctor," Tucker was saying as he handed over the provisions. "Helena's not so far. The mission there takes in the sick." Frank shook his head stubbornly. "Can't leave our claim. It's all we got left." "A claim isn't worth Martha's life," Tucker countered, and Abigail realized he must know these people. After a few more minutes of conversation and Tucker's promise to send help when they reached his sister's ranch, they parted ways. Frank disappeared back into the forest, clutching the precious supplies. "Who was that?" Abigail asked once they were riding again, the encounter having shaken her. "Frank Miller. Used to be a decent prospector until he got caught up in some bad investments. His wife, Martha, was the schoolteacher in Silverdale before they moved out here chasing silver." Tucker's expression was grim. "Your father's bank foreclosed on their house in town last year." Abigail felt a pang of guilt by association. "I didn't know." "No reason you should. The Nelsons don't exactly socialize with the Millers of the world." There was no accusation in his tone, just a statement of fact. They rode in silence for a while, Abigail's mind turning over the encounter. She had always known, abstractly, that her comfortable life came at a cost to others. Her father's business practices were famously unforgiving, but seeing the human impact so directly was sobering. "Is it much further to your sister's ranch?" she asked eventually, changing the subject. Tucker pointed to a distant ridge. "Just beyond those hills. We should make it before sunset." The landscape opened up as they crested the final hill, revealing a modest valley nestled between protective ridges. A small cabin stood near a clear stream, smoke rising from its chimney. A barn and several corrals completed the picture, along with grazing cattle dotting the surrounding pastures. "It's beautiful," Abigail said sincerely, taking in the peaceful scene. Tucker smiled, pride evident in his expression. "Catherine and James built it from nothing. They didn't have much to start with, but they worked hard." As they approached, two small figures burst from the cabin door, racing toward them with excited cries. "Uncle Tucker! Uncle Tucker!" the children's voices carried across the valley. Tucker dismounted quickly, sweeping the children into his arms as they reached him. "Emma, Michael, have you two been good for your ma?" The little girl, her braids flying, nodded earnestly while the boy proclaimed, "I helped with the chickens." A woman appeared in the cabin doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. Even from a distance, Abigail could see the family resemblance, the same strong jawline, the same direct gaze. Catherine Sullivan Rogers was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, and a face that had known both happiness and hardship. Tucker helped Abigail dismount before leading her forward to meet his sister. "Catherine, this is Abigail Nelson." "Abigail, my sister Catherine Rogers." Catherine's eyes were shrewd as they assessed Abigail, taking in the borrowed clothes and uncertain posture. Then she smiled, genuine warmth transforming her features. "Any friend of Tucker's is welcome here. Come inside, you must be exhausted after riding all day." The cabin's interior was humble but immaculately kept. A large hearth dominated one wall, with a cooking pot bubbling over the fire. A sturdy table with benches occupied the center of the main room, while a curtained alcove presumably led to sleeping quarters. Simple shelves held books and a few precious ornaments, a porcelain figurine, a clock, a framed family photograph. "It smells wonderful," Abigail said, inhaling the aroma of beef stew. Catherine gestured for her to sit. "Tucker's message said you might be looking for work." Abigail glanced at Tucker in surprise. "Message?" Tucker looked slightly sheepish. "I sent a boy from town with a note early this morning before you woke. Didn't want to arrive unannounced." "Always thinking ahead, my brother," Catherine said with affection. She turned back to Abigail. "He didn't give many details, just that you needed a fresh start and weren't afraid of hard work." "Both true," Abigail confirmed. Briefly, she explained her situation, omitting some of the more painful details but making it clear she had been disowned for refusing an unwanted marriage. Catherine listened without interruption, her expression thoughtful. When Abigail finished, she nodded decisively. "Well, I can certainly use the help. The children need looking after, especially when I'm busy with the cattle or the garden. There's cooking, cleaning, mending. Endless work, really." "I can learn whatever I don't already know," Abigail promised. "I believe you can," Catherine agreed. "And in return, you'll have room, board, and a small wage once we sell this season's calves." It was more than Abigail had dared hope for. "That's very generous." Catherine's smile held a hint of mischief. "Don't thank me yet. You haven't tried sleeping in our spare room when the wind howls through the chinks in the logs." As they ate dinner together, Abigail found herself relaxing for the first time in days. The children were well-behaved but lively, peppering her with questions about life in town. Catherine was a gracious hostess, despite her practical nature, and Tucker Abigail found her gaze drawn to him repeatedly throughout the meal. He interacted with his niece and nephew with easy affection, his usual reserve melting away in their presence. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at Michael's excited description of a frog he had caught made something flutter in Abigail's chest. After dinner, Catherine showed Abigail to the small room that would be hers, little more than a curtained corner, but with a comfortable-looking pallet and a small chest for her belongings. "It's not what you're used to," Catherine acknowledged, "but it's clean." "It's perfect," Abigail assured her. "Thank you for taking me in." Catherine studied her for a moment. "Tucker seems to think highly of you. That counts for a lot in my book." She paused. "My brother doesn't give his trust easily, but when he does, it's absolute." Before Abigail could formulate a response, Catherine continued. "Get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch." Left alone, Abigail changed into her nightdress and settled onto the pallet. She could hear the murmur of Tucker and Catherine's voices from the main room, occasionally punctuated by laughter. The sounds of family, something she had rarely experienced in her own home, where formal dinners and proper decorum had taken precedence over warmth and genuine connection. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her as she contemplated the dramatic turn her life had taken in just 2 days. From a daughter of privilege, albeit an unhappy one, to a ranch hand living in a corner of a cabin miles from civilization. And yet, strangely, she felt more at peace than she had in years. Her thoughts drifted to Tucker, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness. She had known him less than 48 hours, and yet she felt drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. It was foolish, she knew. He had merely been helping a person in need. There was no reason to believe his interest was anything beyond neighborly concern. With that sobering thought, Abigail finally drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with open skies and hazel eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. The following weeks passed in a blur of new experiences and hard work. True to her word, Catherine was a patient teacher, guiding Abigail through the myriad tasks required to keep the ranch functioning. Abigail learned to milk the cow, collect eggs without antagonizing the hens, churn butter, bake bread in the temperamental oven, and mend clothes with neat, practical stitches. The children took to her immediately, especially Emma, who was fascinated by Abigail's stories of life in town. Michael was more reserved initially, but warmed to her after she spent an afternoon helping him build a miniature corral for his collection of carved wooden animals. Tucker visited regularly, usually staying for a day or two before returning to his business in Silverdale. Each time he arrived, Abigail found herself watching for him from the cabin window, her heart quickening at the sight of his familiar silhouette on horseback. And each time he left, the ranch seemed somehow emptier despite its constant activity. One evening in late July, about a month after Abigail's arrival, she sat on the cabin's small porch, enjoying the cooler air after a scorching day. The children were already asleep, and Catherine was inside, going over the ranch accounts. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up, and her pulse jumped as she recognized Tucker approaching. He wasn't expected for at least another week. "Evening," he called as he dismounted. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Abigail replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her pleasure at seeing him. "We weren't expecting you, though." Tucker secured his horse and joined her on the porch, settling onto the bench beside her. "Had some news I thought you should hear in person." Something in his tone made her tense. "What is it?" He hesitated. "Judge Harmon passed through Silverdale yesterday. He was asking questions about you." Abigail's stomach clenched with dread. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he hasn't given up on the idea of making you his wife." Tucker's expression was grim. "Your father was with him, looking mighty pleased with himself." The idea that her father was still pursuing this match, even after disowning her, sent a chill through Abigail. "They can't force me to marry against my will." "No," Tucker agreed, "but they can make life difficult. Judge Harmon has a lot of influence in these parts." Abigail wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer evening. "What should I do?" Tucker's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "For now, nothing. They don't know where you are, and I haven't told anyone, but I thought you should be aware, in case they somehow track you here." The door opened, and Catherine stepped out, a ledger in hand. Her eyes took in their clasped hands before Tucker could withdraw his, but she made no comment. "I thought I heard your voice," she said instead. "Everything all right?" Tucker briefly explained the situation. Catherine's expression hardened at the mention of Judge Harmon. "That old vulture," she muttered. "I've heard stories about how he treated his last wife. No wonder you ran, Abigail." "I didn't exactly run," Abigail corrected. "I was thrown out." "Same difference," Catherine shrugged. "The point is, you're safe here. We look after our own." The casual inclusion in their family circle brought unexpected tears to Abigail's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, but not before Tucker noticed. His hand found hers again, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you," Abigail said, her voice slightly husky. "Both of you," Catherine nodded briskly. "Now I'm turning in. Some of us have to be up with the chickens." She gave her brother a pointed look. "You staying the night, if there's room," Tucker replied. "When isn't there?" Catherine disappeared back inside, leaving them alone on the porch. Silence settled between them, comfortable but charged with something Abigail couldn't quite name. Tucker's hand still rested lightly on hers, and she made no move to pull away. "How are you finding ranch life?" he asked eventually. "Catherine says you've taken to it well." Abigail smiled. "I enjoy it more than I expected to. There's something satisfying about work that produces tangible results: bread rising, a garden growing, children learning to read." She glanced at him. It's very different from my life in town, where the days seem to blend together in an endless round of social calls and needlepoint." Tucker chuckled. "I can't imagine you sitting quietly with embroidery." "No. What do you imagine me doing, then?" The question hung in the air between them, more loaded than she had intended. Tucker's eyes, silver in the moonlight, met hers directly. "Living," he said simply. "Making choices. Building something real." He paused. "Being happy." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "I think I could be happy here," she admitted softly. Tucker's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. "I'm glad to hear it." The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility. Abigail found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by a force she couldn't resist. A wolf howled in the distance, breaking the spell. Tucker straightened, withdrawing his hand. "I should let you get some rest. It's late." Disappointment flooded through Abigail, but she nodded. "Of course. Good night, Tucker." "Good night, Abigail." As she lay in bed that night, sleep once again eluded her. The memory of Tucker's hand on hers, the intensity in his eyes, the unspoken words that seemed to hover between them, all combined to keep her mind racing. Was it possible he felt the same inexplicable draw that she did? Or was she misinterpreting simple kindness as something more? August brought with it the back-breaking work of the harvest. The small garden Catherine maintained was vital to their winter survival, and every vegetable needed to be picked, preserved, or stored at precisely the right time. Abigail learned to can tomatoes, string beans to dry, and pack root vegetables in sand for long-term storage. The work was exhausting but satisfying. Each evening, she fell into bed with aching muscles, but a sense of accomplishment that was entirely new to her. Tucker's visits became more frequent, often coinciding with tasks that required additional strength, repairing the barn roof, bringing in the hay, helping with the fall cattle roundup. Abigail tried not to read too much into his increased presence, but she couldn't help noticing the way his gaze followed her, or how he always seemed to position himself nearby when they worked together. One crisp September afternoon, Abigail was hanging laundry while the children played nearby. The sound of approaching riders made her pause. 2 men on horseback were approaching from the east, not the direction of Silverdale. "Emma, Michael," she called calmly, "go inside and tell your mother we have visitors." The children scampered off, sensing the tension in her voice. Abigail continued hanging laundry, but her movements were mechanical now, her attention focused on the approaching strangers. As they drew nearer, relief washed over her. One was Tucker. The other was a man she didn't recognize, older, with a gray beard and spectacles. "Abigail," Tucker called, dismounting. "This is Dr. Miller from Helena. He's on his way to check on Frank and Martha." The doctor tipped his hat. "Miss Nelson." Abigail nodded in greeting, wondering how the doctor knew her name. Tucker must have mentioned her. Catherine emerged from the cabin, wiping flour from her hands. "Doctor, welcome. You'll stay for lunch before continuing on." "Much obliged, Mrs. Rogers," the doctor replied. "It's a long ride to the Miller place." "Over a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried venison, Doctor." Miller shared news from Helena and beyond. The railroad was pushing farther west, bringing more settlers. A new governor had been appointed to the territory. And most pertinent to Abigail, Judge Harmon was still asking questions about her whereabouts. "He seems quite determined to find you, Miss Nelson," the doctor remarked, offering rewards for information. Abigail's appetite vanished. What kind of rewards? Money, mostly, but also promises of favorable rulings in court cases. The doctor shook his head disapprovingly. "It's causing quite a stir. Some folk are combing the territory looking for you, hoping to cash in." Tucker's jaw tightened. "How many people know she's here?" "Just me, as far as I'm aware." Dr. Miller assured him. "And I only know because you told me yourself when you came for medicine for Martha last month." After lunch, the doctor continued on his way, leaving a heavy atmosphere in his wake. "This complicates things," Catherine said once they were alone. "If people are actively searching for you." "I should leave," Abigail concluded, her heart sinking. "I'm putting you all at risk by staying." "Absolutely not," Tucker said firmly. "Where would you go?" "I don't know. Further west, perhaps. Oregon or California." Catherine and Tucker exchanged a look that Abigail couldn't interpret. "There's another option," Catherine said slowly. "One that would make it impossible for Judge Harmon to force a marriage." Abigail looked at her questioningly. "If you were already married to someone else," Catherine continued, her gaze shifting meaningfully to her brother. Tucker's eyes widened. "Catherine, don't Catherine me," his sister cut him off. "It makes perfect sense. You two are clearly sweet on each other, though heaven knows why neither of you has done anything about it. This just speeds things up a bit." Abigail felt her face flame. "I couldn't ask Tucker to sacrifice his freedom just to protect me." "It wouldn't be a sacrifice," Tucker said quietly, surprising her. His eyes, when they met hers, were intense. "But it would have to be real, Abigail. I won't enter into a marriage of convenience that could be dissolved once the danger passes. That's not who I am." The implication of his words hung in the air. He was offering a real marriage, not just protection, but a life together. "I need time to think," Abigail said, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine stood, practical as ever. "Well, think while you work. Those potatoes won't dig themselves, and we've still got the north field to finish before sundown." The physical labor of the afternoon gave Abigail's mind something to focus on besides the monumental decision before her. Marriage to Tucker would certainly solve her immediate problem. Judge Harmon could not force her to marry him if she was already someone's wife. But marriage was meant to be forever, especially out here where divorce was rare and scandalous. Did she love Tucker Sullivan? The question echoed in her mind as she dug potatoes from the rich soil. She admired him, certainly, found him attractive undeniably, trusted him completely. But love? Was 2 months enough time to know such a thing? And yet, when she imagined her future, it was Tucker's face she saw beside her. Tucker's children she imagined alongside Emma and Michael. Tucker's hand she reached for in times of trouble. By the time the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the fields, Abigail had made her decision. She found Tucker in the barn, brushing down his horse. For a moment, she simply watched him, taking in the strong lines of his back, the gentle way he spoke to the animal, the careful attention he paid to his task. "Tucker," she said softly. He turned, brush pausing mid-stroke. "Abigail." She stepped closer, her heart pounding. "I've been thinking about what Catherine suggested." Tucker set the brush down, giving her his full attention. "And if," she began, then cleared her throat and started again. "If your offer is genuine, then yes, I would be honored to marry you." Tucker's expression remained serious. "You're sure? This isn't just about Harmon." Abigail shook her head. "No, he's the reason for the timing, perhaps, but not for the decision itself." She gathered her courage. "I care for you, Tucker, more than I thought possible in such a short time. I don't know if it's love yet, but I think it could be. With time." A slow smile spread across Tucker's face, transforming his features. "That's good enough for me." He closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Because I'm already halfway in love with you, Abigail Nelson." His lips met hers in a gentle kiss that quickly deepened as Abigail responded with unexpected fervor. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she marveled at how perfectly she seemed to fit against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. I think Catherine suspected this would happen all along. Abigail laughed softly. Your sister is a very perceptive woman. That she is. Tucker stepped back slightly, though he kept hold of her hands. We should do this properly. The circuit preacher comes through Hawthorne Creek every other Sunday. That's only 3 days from now. So soon? Abigail's eyes widened. Better sooner than later with Harmon looking for you, Tucker pointed out. Unless you need more time. Abigail shook her head. No, 3 days is perfect. The next morning, Tucker rode back to Silverdale to make arrangements, promising to return the following day. In his absence, Catherine helped Abigail prepare, lending her a dress that had been packed away since before James's death. It was my wedding dress, Catherine explained as Abigail tried it on. Nothing fancy, but it's the best we have. The simple blue cotton dress fit surprisingly well after a few minor adjustments. It wasn't the elaborate white gown Abigail had once imagined wearing, but somehow it seemed more appropriate for the woman she had become. True to his word, Tucker returned the next afternoon, bringing with him a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Abigail asked as he handed it to her. "Open it and see," he replied, an uncharacteristic nervousness in his manner. Inside the package, nestled in a scrap of velvet, was a delicate gold band. The simple ring gleamed in the afternoon light, its unadorned surface speaking of permanence and sincerity rather than flashy ostentation. "Tucker, it's beautiful," Abigail breathed. "But how did you? It was my mother's," he explained. "I've kept it since she passed, thinking someday." He trailed off, then continued more firmly. "I want you to have it if you'll accept it." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes. "Of course I will." The day of the wedding dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. Catherine had spent the previous evening cooking and baking, determined that the occasion would be properly celebrated despite its hasty arrangement. "It's not every day my only brother gets married," she declared when Abigail protested the fuss. "Besides, the children are beside themselves with excitement." Indeed, Emma and Michael had been bubbling with questions and anticipation since learning of the impending wedding. Emma was especially thrilled at the prospect of Abigail becoming her aunt officially. The small church in Hawthorne Creek was a simple wooden structure with a single room and plain benches for the congregation. As Abigail entered on Catherine's arm, the closest thing to family she had, she saw Tucker waiting at the front, looking uncharacteristically nervous in a clean shirt and his best trousers. Their eyes met across the small space, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. In that moment, Abigail knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. The ceremony was brief and straightforward, the preacher's words time-honored and sincere. When Tucker slipped the gold band onto her finger, his hand steady despite his evident emotion, Abigail felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Tucker's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, a seal on their vows and a glimpse of the future they would build together. The small celebration afterward, held at Catherine's ranch, was unlike anything Abigail could have imagined for her wedding day, and all the better for it. Neighbors from surrounding homesteads joined them, bringing food and good wishes. Someone produced a fiddle, and impromptu dancing filled the yard as the afternoon stretched into evening. Abigail found herself watching her new husband as he laughed with friends, swung his niece and nephew in dizzying circles, and occasionally sought her out with his eyes across the gathering, as if to reassure himself that she was real, that this day had actually happened. As twilight deepened into night, the guests gradually departed, leaving the family alone. Catherine shooed the drowsy children to bed before turning to the newlyweds with a practical air. "Tucker's cabin at the livery isn't fit for a married couple," she announced, "and you two need your privacy. You'll take the main bedroom tonight. The children and I will manage in the back room." Despite their protests, Catherine was adamant. Soon Abigail found herself alone with Tucker in the small bedroom that had been Catherine's since she built the cabin with her late husband. An awkward silence fell as they stood facing each other in the lamplight. For all their growing affection, this step, the physical consummation of their marriage, was a significant threshold to cross. Tucker broke the tension first. "I know this happened quickly," he said, his voice low. "If you need time." Abigail stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest. She could feel his heart beating strongly beneath her palm. "I don't need time, Tucker, I need you." The rawness of her admission surprised them both. Tucker's intake of breath was sharp, his eyes darkening with desire. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned down to kiss her, his hands coming up to frame her face. This kiss was different from their previous ones, deeper, hungrier, laden with intent. Abigail responded in kind, her fingers tangling in his hair as she pressed herself against him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this? About us?" Abigail smiled, her heart full. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life." As they came together in the darkness, discovering each other with tender exploration and growing passion, Abigail thought of the locked door of her family home, how final it had seemed, how devastating. Yet it had led her here to this man, this life, this love that was only beginning to unfold. And as Tucker held her afterward, his breathing steady and his arms secure around her, she knew that his door would indeed remain open to her, always. Winter settled over the Montana territory with uncompromising ferocity that year. By early December, snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the rugged terrain into a vast white wilderness. The creek froze solid, the cattle huddled in sheltered valleys, and the journey between Silverdale and the ranch became treacherous even for experienced riders. Abigail and Tucker had established a rhythm to their new life together. After their wedding, they had initially planned to divide their time between the livery in Silverdale and Catherine's ranch, but the early onset of winter had forced a change in plans. The mountain pass between the two locations became impassable after a particularly vicious blizzard in late November, effectively stranding Tucker at the ranch until the spring thaw. Far from being a hardship, this enforced isolation had given the newlyweds precious time to build the foundation of their marriage away from external pressures. Each day brought new discoveries: Tucker's surprising love of poetry, Abigail's unexpected talent for woodcarving, their shared enjoyment of quiet evenings by the fire. Catherine had tactfully rearranged the cabin's interior, adding a new room built off the main structure where she now slept with the children, giving Abigail and Tucker the original bedroom. The arrangement worked well, providing the privacy the couple needed while maintaining the close family connections that had become so important to Abigail. On this particular December morning, Abigail woke to find Tucker already gone from their bed, his side cold. Dawn had barely broken, the gray light filtering weakly through the small window. She dressed quickly in the chilly air, adding an extra woolen shawl that Catherine had knitted for her as an early Christmas present. In the main room, Emma and Michael were already up, helping their mother prepare breakfast. Catherine looked up as Abigail entered. "Tucker's checking the livestock," she explained before Abigail could ask. "The temperature dropped again overnight. He's worried about the young calves." Abigail nodded, moving to help with the breakfast preparations. "Is there anything I can do?" Just keep the coffee hot for when he returns, Catherine replied. He'll need it. As if summoned by the mention of coffee, the door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a blast of frigid air. Tucker stamped his feet on the threshold, his beard and eyebrows frosted white, his cheeks ruddy from the cold. It's brutal out there, he announced, shrugging out of his heavy coat. Lost 2 calves despite the shelter. The rest seem to be holding on. Abigail poured him a steaming cup of coffee, which he accepted gratefully, his gloved hands engulfing the mug. Their eyes met over the rim as he took a long drink, and the warmth in his gaze belied the chill of his exterior. "Thank you," he murmured, the words encompassing more than just the coffee. After breakfast, the day unfolded with the familiar rhythm of ranch life, adapted to winter's constraints. Indoor tasks took precedence, mending harnesses, repairing tools, preserving the last of the fall butchering, and endless knitting of warm garments. Abigail had become quite proficient with needles under Catherine's tutelage, producing serviceable if not elegant socks and mittens. In the afternoon, as the short winter day began to wane, Tucker announced his intention to check on Frank and Martha Miller, whose homestead was a few miles distant. "I promised the doctor I'd look in on them weekly," he reminded Catherine when she expressed concern about the weather. "It's been 8 days since my last visit." "At least take the sleigh," Catherine insisted. "It's safer than riding in this snow." Tucker agreed, and Abigail, suddenly restless after days confined to the cabin, asked to accompany him. "It's dangerously cold," Tucker warned, eyeing her with concern. "I'll bundle up properly," she promised. "Besides, Martha might appreciate another woman's company." Eventually, Tucker acquiesced, and soon they were gliding across the snow-covered landscape, the horse's breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Abigail, nestled against Tucker's side beneath layers of buffalo robes, found herself marveling at the stark beauty around them. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their peaks lost in low-hanging clouds, while closer at hand, pine trees drooped under their burden of snow. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "Harsh, but beautiful." Tucker's arm tightened around her. "Like many things worth having," he replied, his voice thoughtful. The Miller homestead came into view as they crested a small rise, a crude cabin with a partially collapsed lean-to for livestock. Smoke rose thinly from the chimney, the only sign of habitation in the otherwise desolate scene. Frank met them at the door, his gaunt face breaking into a relieved smile at the sight of visitors. "Sullivan, didn't expect anyone in this weather." "Promised the doctor," Tucker replied simply, helping Abigail down from the sleigh. "How's Martha?" Frank's expression clouded. "Better some days than others. The medicine helps, but—" He trailed off, gesturing for them to enter. The interior of the cabin was desperately sparse but meticulously clean. Martha Miller lay on a narrow cot in the corner, her once pretty face now thin and pale, her eyes bright with fever. She struggled to sit up as they entered. "Mrs. Sullivan," she greeted Abigail weakly. "How kind of you to visit." Abigail moved to her side, taking the woman's thin hand in hers. "Please call me Abigail, and don't try to get up, save your strength." While Tucker spoke with Frank about practical matters, firewood, food supplies, the condition of their remaining livestock, Abigail sat with Martha, listening to her labored breathing and attempting to provide what comfort she could. "Frank says you were a school teacher," Abigail said, trying to engage the sick woman in conversation. Martha's eyes brightened slightly. "Yes, for 7 years. I miss the children." Her gaze drifted to a small shelf where a few battered books were carefully arranged. "I brought my favorites with me when we left town. Frank thinks it was foolish to use precious space for books, but I couldn't bear to leave them behind." Abigail reached for one of the volumes, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, its binding worn from frequent handling. "Would you like me to read to you?" Martha's smile was answer enough. For the next hour, Abigail read aloud, her voice filling the small cabin with words of love and beauty that seemed to transcend their harsh surroundings. Tucker and Frank paused in their conversation to listen, the power of the poetry drawing them in despite themselves. When it was time to leave, Abigail left the Millers with practical gifts: a jar of preserved peaches, a loaf of fresh bread, a pair of warm socks she had finished the previous evening, but she also promised to return with more books. "That was kind of you," Tucker said as they began the journey home, the short winter day already fading into dusk. "The reading, I mean. I could see it lifted her spirits." "It cost me nothing," Abigail replied, "and she has so little joy in her life." She hesitated. "Tucker, could we help them more? They're barely surviving out here." Tucker sighed, his breath forming a cloud in the cold air. "I've offered Frank work at the livery come spring, but he won't leave that worthless claim. He's convinced he'll strike silver if he just keeps digging." "And Martha pays the price for his dream," Abigail said softly. Tucker was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes we don't see the treasure right in front of us because we're too busy searching for fool's gold." His hand found hers beneath the buffalo robes. "I was lucky. I recognized what mattered before it was too late." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Abigail. Though they had married hastily, partly out of necessity, their feelings for each other had only deepened over the passing months. What had begun as mutual respect and attraction had blossomed into something profoundly more significant. "I love you," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could consider them. It was the first time she had said it aloud, though the feeling had been growing in her heart for weeks. Tucker pulled the sleigh to a halt, turning to face her fully. His eyes, reflecting the last light of day, were intense as they searched hers. "Say that again," he requested, his voice hushed. "I love you, Tucker Sullivan," Abigail repeated, more confident now. "I love your strength and your kindness. I love your integrity and your quiet wisdom. I love the way you care for your family and for strangers in need. I love—" Her words were cut off as Tucker's mouth claimed hers in a kiss that left no doubt of his feelings. Despite the bitter cold around them, warmth flooded through Abigail as she responded with equal fervor. "I've loved you since I found you standing in my stable that rainy night," Tucker confessed when they finally broke apart. "Soaked to the skin, but still holding your head high, refusing to be broken by what life had thrown at you." They completed the journey home in a glow that had nothing to do with the physical temperature, arriving at the ranch just as true darkness fell. Catherine took one look at their faces as they entered the cabin and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. That night, as they lay together in their small bedroom, the wind howling outside but powerless to touch them in their cocoon of warmth, Abigail reflected on how completely her life had transformed in just 6 months. From a daughter of privilege living in a gilded cage to a rancher's wife with calloused hands and a heart full to bursting, it was a metamorphosis she could never have imagined, yet one she would never wish to undo. "What are you thinking about?" Tucker murmured, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "About doors," Abigail replied. "How one closing can lead to another opening, and how sometimes what looks like an ending is really just the beginning of something far better." Tucker pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Well, Mrs. Sullivan, our door is just beginning to open, and I promise you it's never going to close." Spring came late to the Montana Territory that year, but when it finally arrived, it did so with exuberant abundance. Meadows that had lain dormant under snow for months erupted in wildflowers. creeks swelled with snowmelt, and the air filled with the sounds of returning birds and newborn livestock. With the thawing of the mountain pass in late April, Tucker was finally able to return to Silverdale to check on the livery. Abigail accompanied him, both anxious and curious to see the town again after her long absence. As they rode in, Abigail couldn't help feeling a flutter of apprehension. What if they encountered her father or worse, Judge Harmon? The fear must have shown on her face, for Tucker reached across to squeeze her hand reassuringly. "You're Mrs. Sullivan now," he reminded her. "No one can touch you or force you to do anything against your will." His confidence bolstered her courage, and she straightened her shoulders as they approached the livery. Tucker's young assistant, a lanky boy named Ben, had kept things running adequately in his absence, though there were repairs needed and accounts to settle. While Tucker attended to business, Abigail ventured into town, curious to see what had changed. The general store was her first stop, where she was greeted warmly by Mr. Peterson. "Mrs. Sullivan." "A pleasure to see you back in town," the shopkeeper said, his use of her married name still giving Abigail a small thrill. "I heard you and Tucker tied the knot back in the fall. Congratulations." "Thank you," Abigail replied, marveling at how natural it felt to be addressed as Tucker's wife, when 6 months ago such an idea would have seemed impossible. As she shopped for supplies, Abigail gradually became aware of curious glances and whispered conversations following her progress through town. Evidently, her marriage was still news, and possibly a source of disappointment to those who had hoped to claim Judge Harmon's reward. Speaking of the judge, Abigail had nearly completed her errands without encountering either him or her father when a familiar voice stopped her cold. "Abigail." She turned slowly to face her mother, Elizabeth Nelson, standing outside the milliner's shop. The older woman looked thinner than Abigail remembered, with new lines etched around her mouth and eyes. "Mother," Abigail acknowledged, her voice carefully neutral. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the gulf between them seemingly unbridgeable. Then, unexpectedly, Elizabeth stepped forward. "You look well," she said, her eyes taking in Abigail's simple but sturdy clothing, her sun-kissed complexion, the confidence in her posture. "Marriage agrees with you, it seems." Abigail blinked in surprise. "Yes, it does. Tucker is a good man." Elizabeth nodded, a flicker of something like regret crossing her features. "Your father was furious when he heard. Judge Harmon even more so." "I'm sorry if it caused difficulties for you," Abigail said, surprised to find she meant it. Her mother had always been as much a prisoner of her father's ambitions as Abigail herself had been. "It's of no consequence now," Elizabeth replied with a small wave of her gloved hand. "The judge has moved on to pursuing the widow Preston and her substantial properties." She hesitated, then added, "I should have stood up for you more." The admission, so unexpected, momentarily robbed Abigail of speech. "Mother, no, let me say this," Elizabeth interrupted, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "I knew what kind of man Harmon was. I knew you deserved better, but I was too afraid of your father's reaction to speak against the match." Her eyes, so similar to Abigail's own, held genuine remorse. "I'm glad you found the courage I lacked." Before Abigail could formulate a response, Elizabeth continued, her voice dropping even lower. "Your father doesn't know I'm speaking to you. It's better if it stays that way, but I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you, Abigail, for making your own path." With that, she pressed something into Abigail's hand, a small velvet pouch, and turned to go. "Be happy," she said softly, and then she was gone, disappearing into the milliner's shop. Stunned, Abigail opened the pouch to find her grandmother's pearl earrings, a family heirloom she had been forced to leave behind in her hasty departure. The gesture brought tears to her eyes, representing as it did a small but significant bridge across the divide her father had created. When she rejoined Tucker at the livery, he immediately sensed her emotional state. "What happened?" he asked, drawing her aside from Ben's curious ears. Abigail recounted her encounter with her mother, showing Tucker the earrings. "It's not reconciliation," she concluded, "but it's something." An acknowledgement, at least. Tucker nodded, understanding the significance. "Mothers and daughters have complex relationships," he said, thinking no doubt of Catherine and Emma. "Maybe with time." "Maybe," Abigail agreed, though she wasn't counting on it. Her mother had made her choice long ago to stand by her husband, regardless of his actions. One moment of connection didn't change that fundamental reality. They spent 3 days in Silverdale, staying in Tucker's small but comfortable quarters above the livery. It was strange for Abigail to be back in town, seeing familiar faces and places from her new perspective as Mrs. Sullivan rather than Miss Nelson. Some people were openly curious, others warmly congratulatory, and a few, particularly those closely connected to her father's business interests, coldly distant on their final day. As they were preparing to return to the ranch, a commotion in the street drew their attention. A group of men on horseback had ridden in, led by a distinguished figure Abigail recognized immediately. Judge Harmon. Her heart raced, but Tucker's steady presence beside her calmed her fears. "Let's just go about our business," he suggested quietly. "No need to hide, but no need to invite confrontation either." They continued loading their wagon, but it soon became apparent that the judge's party was heading directly for the livery. Tucker positioned himself protectively in front of Abigail as the men dismounted. Judge Harmon, a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and cold eyes, assessed them with barely disguised contempt. "Sullivan," he acknowledged curtly before turning his gaze to Abigail. "Miss Nelson, or should I say Mrs. Sullivan now?" "Judge Harmon," Abigail replied, proud of how steady her voice remained. "What brings you to the livery?" "Business in the area," the judge answered vaguely. "I require horses for my party. We'll be traveling into the high country for several days." Tucker, his expression professionally neutral despite the tension Abigail could feel radiating from him, nodded. "Of course, Ben can assist you in selecting suitable mounts." The judge's eyes narrowed. "I prefer to deal with the proprietor directly." Understanding that Tucker was reluctant to leave her alone with the judge, Abigail touched his arm gently. "I'll finish loading our supplies while you help the judge," she suggested. "We should get on the road before midday if we want to reach the ranch by sundown." Tucker hesitated, then nodded. "I won't be long." As he led Judge Harmon toward the corral, Abigail continued her work, aware of the curious glances from the judge's companions. She kept her head high, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. When Tucker returned some 20 minutes later, his jaw was tight with suppressed anger. He waited until they were on the road out of town before speaking. "That pompous, vindictive old—" He bit off the rest of the sentence, visibly controlling his temper. He spent the entire time making thinly veiled threats about how easily a livery could lose its business license if the territorial judge found reason to question its operations. Abigail's hand flew to her mouth. "He's threatening your livelihood because of me." Tucker's expression softened as he looked at her. "Don't worry. His kind of threats only work against people who have something to hide, and I run an honest business. Besides, he'll lose interest eventually, especially now that he's pursuing the widow Preston." "My mother mentioned that," Abigail confirmed. "Apparently, Mrs. Preston owns substantial properties that would be advantageous to someone with political ambitions." Tucker snorted. "Of course. It was never about you specifically, Abigail." It was about what you represented: connections to banking and railroad interests through your father. The realization was both relieving and strangely deflating. All the fear and upheaval of the past year had been over a calculated business arrangement, not any genuine emotional attachment. "Well, his loss is my gain," Tucker continued, his voice warming as he glanced at her. "I got the far better end of that bargain." By the time they returned to Catherine's ranch, Abigail had put the encounter with Judge Harmon firmly behind her. The joy of seeing Emma and Michael running to greet them, their small faces alight with excitement, was the perfect antidote to the lingering unpleasantness of town. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm through the late spring and early summer. Tucker divided his time between the livery in Silverdale and the ranch, while Abigail primarily remained at the ranch, helping Catherine with the children and the endless work of maintaining their home. In July, they received word that Martha Miller had finally succumbed to her illness. The news was not unexpected, but saddened them nonetheless. Tucker rode out to offer condolences and practical assistance to Frank, returning with the disturbing news that the widower had become increasingly erratic, spending days at a time in his mine shaft, convinced that a major silver strike was imminent. "He's not eating properly, barely sleeping," Tucker reported grimly. "I tried to convince him to come stay at the ranch for a while, but he refused, says he's too close to success to leave now." Catherine shook her head sadly. "Some men can't be helped if they won't help themselves." The incident cast a pall over what had otherwise been a joyful summer. For Abigail especially, the Millers' tragic story struck a chord. Both Martha and Frank had once been respected members of the community, she a teacher, he a skilled prospector. Their decline into poverty and desperation, culminating in Martha's death and Frank's deteriorating mental state, was a stark reminder of how precarious life on the frontier could be. In August, exactly 1 year after their hasty wedding, Tucker surprised Abigail with a small celebration. Catherine had conspired with him to prepare a special dinner, complete with a cake made from precious store-bought sugar. The children had crafted simple but heartfelt gifts: a carved wooden heart from Michael and a small embroidered handkerchief from Emma, guided by Catherine's patient hands. Tucker's gift, however, was the most unexpected. After dinner, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple, he handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Abigail asked, touched by the gesture. "Open it and see," Tucker replied, echoing his words from when he had given her his mother's ring. Inside the package was a deed, legal documentation for a plot of land adjacent to Catherine's ranch, with both their names listed as owners. "Tucker," Abigail breathed, stunned by the implication. How did you? "I've been saving," he explained. "And I sold a quarter interest in the livery to Ben. He's earned it, and it freed up enough capital for this." He took her hands in his. "I thought it was time we had a place of our own, somewhere to build our future." Tears sprang to Abigail's eyes. "It's perfect," she whispered. "There's nothing there yet," Tucker cautioned. "Just land. We'll need to build a cabin, clear fields. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Abigail replied, echoing his words from months earlier. The fall brought a flurry of activity as they began work on their new homestead. The men from neighboring ranches came to help raise the cabin, a tradition of frontier cooperation that touched Abigail deeply. Catherine contributed furnishings: a table, chairs, a bed frame that had been stored in the barn since her own early days of marriage. By October, as the aspens turned golden and the first frost whitened the ground in the mornings, the small cabin was habitable, if not yet completely finished. It stood on a gentle rise overlooking a meadow, with the creek running along one edge of the property and Catherine's ranch visible in the distance. Moving day was both exciting and emotional. Emma and Michael were tearful, having grown accustomed to having their aunt and uncle under the same roof. Catherine put on a brave face but hugged Abigail fiercely before they left. "You're not going far," she reminded the children, and perhaps herself as well. "Just over the ridge. We'll see each other nearly every day." Still, as Abigail and Tucker drove their wagon of belongings the short distance to their new home, there was a sense of momentous change, of a new chapter beginning. That first night in their own cabin, with the fire crackling in the hearth Tucker had built with his own hands, and the stars visible through the single window, Abigail felt a profound sense of completion. From the frightened, disowned daughter standing outside her parents' locked door to this moment of true independence and deep love, it had been a journey she could never have anticipated but would never regret. "Happy?" Tucker asked, coming to stand behind her as she gazed out at the night sky. Abigail leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his chest, the security of his arms as they encircled her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. He turned her in his arms, his expression serious in the firelight. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Something I've suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain of before saying anything." Abigail felt a flutter of anticipation. She had her own suspicions about what he might have noticed, the subtle changes in her body, her recent bouts of morning sickness carefully hidden from everyone but Catherine, who had raised a knowing eyebrow but said nothing. "What is it?" she asked, wondering if her secret was about to be shared. Tucker's face broke into a smile so radiant it took her breath away. "Frank Miller struck silver, a real vein, not just traces. He came to the livery yesterday, looking like a wild man but clutching ore samples that practically glittered." His expression sobered slightly. "He wanted me to know first because of how I tried to help him and Martha. Said he wished she had lived to see it." "Oh, Tucker," Abigail breathed. "That's wonderful news for Frank. Perhaps now he can find some peace." Tucker nodded. "He's already talking about establishing a foundation in Martha's name to support education in the territory. Says no teacher should ever have to choose between marriage and her profession, as Martha did." The generosity of the gesture moved Abigail deeply. From tragedy and loss, something positive might yet emerge, a legacy that would honor Martha Miller's passion for learning and perhaps improve the lives of other women in the territory. "Life is strange, isn't it?" she mused. "How joy and sorrow twine together, how endings become beginnings." Tucker cupped her face in his hands. "Speaking of beginnings," he said softly, "when were you planning to tell me about our own new beginning?" Abigail's eyes widened. "You know," Tucker's smile was tender, "Catherine might have mentioned her suspicions. And I've noticed the changes in you, subtle but there." His hand drifted to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Is it true? Are we to have a child?" The wonder in his voice erased any anxiety Abigail might have felt about his reaction. "Yes," she confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Sometime in the early spring, according to Catherine's calculations." Tucker pulled her close, his embrace careful but fervent. "A child," he murmured against her hair. "Our child." As they stood together in the home they had built, with the promise of new life growing within her, Abigail thought again of doors, the one that had closed behind her that rainy night in Silverdale, and the one Tucker had opened in its place. A door that had indeed never closed, that had led her not just to shelter but to love, family, and a future brighter than anything she could have imagined. "I love you, Tucker Sullivan," she whispered, the words as true now as they had been the first time she spoke them. "And I love you, Abigail Sullivan," he replied, "now and always." Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance across the Montana sky, bearing witness to the simple truth that sometimes, when one door closes, another opens to a path far more beautiful than we ever dared to dream.